Sati, did you ever go through a period of time in your life where you were fearful of carbs or confused about carbs, or have you always had a good relationship with the carb?
I've mostly had a good relationship because I don't fear carbs, but I will say that I had rice the other day and I was like, oh, it's been a really long time since I've had rice. And I've noticed that just gradually somehow they've kind of dropped out of my diet, but not by any like intentional move on my part.
Were you like happy to have them again? Were you like,
Oh yeah, it was great. Yeah.
Yep.
Rice is tasty.
Rice is a win. I like a rice. Yeah. We cooked for some friends that came over last Friday night, and we made like a huge batch of rice and then like a stir fry with the just meats and some vegetables. And I was like, we're for sure going to have leftovers because it was a lot. And I just made sure that we did not have leftovers.
Yes. But I also remember a time when I first started working here and we'd all kind of bring our lunches to work or whatever, and you'd kind of eyeball what I was eating, and you'd be like, where's the carbs? And so that was like the first time I realized I need to eat carbs for training. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. I thought you were going to say like, where's the protein? But maybe
there was some protein in there.
You were past that part. You already had the protein.
I was eating protein, but not enough. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I still have to really work at it to get my allotment in.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're talking carb confusion episode, carb confusion episode part 17.
So, there have been a lot.
We've done a lot.
But people are still confused.
For sure, they're still confused. I think many people, even ones that think, I got this, I understand this.
Out, yeah.
Still confused.
And no wonder, because there's a lot of conflicting information about carbs out there.
Mm-hmm. What's the question that we get? What are we getting right now?
Are all carbs created equal? You know, like, is there such a thing as good carbs or bad carbs?
Yep, got it.
And another one is, does it matter how many carbs you eat?
Now, how do you know if you're having too many carbs?
Right, how do you know if you're having too many carbs?
Yep. Yeah, I had a call with a private coaching client who was saying like, I'm like, what's the best carb for me to have? And it was kind of along the same lines. I was like, well, the best carb is the one that you like the most, that you can eat and stay within your target kind of goals for your nutrition, right? What that generally looks like for most people is, a certain category of foods, but at the end of the day, you can kind of make a lot of different carbohydrates work. And so I kind of like, it's like, it seems so obvious to me at this point in this stage, like actually all carbs are kind of, there's no best carb or worst carb. Mm-hmm. It's just the scenario, the situation. So rather than just dive into like examples, like maybe we can structure this in a way that helps people to like ask the right questions first, understand some of the foundational, science behind carbohydrates, and really what's the question behind the question.
Exactly.
And then we can get into some more specific examples. So what do you think the question behind the question here is?
Well, one thing that I think definitely lurks behind the question is, will carbs make me fat?
Totally, yeah. That's where I was going with this. Right. And like, what's still out there like perpetuating that and making people feel like that's the thing? Like carbs are going to make me fat.
Yeah. Well, I think two things. One is like the low carb craze, where it's like this general cultural shift to low carb equals healthy. And then a subset of that is the keto craze, where it's like, oh, if you want your body to burn fat, you've got to eliminate all carbohydrates.
Yeah, right. So there's this idea. So number one, that's a good one to start with. Burning fat and losing fat are very different things, and people don't quite understand. There's a lot of confusion that's been perpetuated by that kind of low carb keto community, which is if I don't have any carbs in my diet, then my body will burn fat for fuel. The problem is that that's not how fat loss works, right? Like fat loss works when at the end of the day, you burn more fat than your body consumes in the way of energy. So you could be eating a low carbohydrate diet and using fat as your fuel source most of the day. But because you're only burning 2,500 calories each day and you're consuming 2,500 or 2,700, you're in a fat burning state all day, but you're not losing any net fat from your body because you're in caloric maintenance or even surplus. There's such a thing as gaining weight on keto. You
Right.
can gain weight on keto.
Sure.
Just like you can lose weight on keto. So that's like, you know, that's also what people talk about in, this is like a confusion around fasted cardio. Get up in the morning, do your cardio fasted. Well, why would you want to do cardio fasted? Well, because you don't have any food, you don't have any fuel, so your body uses its stored fat for fuel when you do fasted cardio. That should be good, right? Like if I get up and I do cardio for an hour with no food in my stomach and I just burn fat, then that fat is gone. It's like, well, no, it's not just gone because fat stores, energy stores in your body, they're dynamic. They're constantly breaking down and building back up, right? And so at the end of the day, it's not about like how much did you burn? It's the net amount of burn versus storage in one day. You're storing body fat right now and you're burning body fat right now. It's like this thing that's just a currency that's always moving around. So just because you burn more body fat during your cardio session doesn't mean, because you were fasted, doesn't mean that you burn more fat off your body like in sum total. Mm-hmm. So I think that's number one. And then number two, you mentioned like this low carb, you know, craze, people feeling like that's the way to lose body fat, because when you go low carb, most people initially, it's just an easy way for them to remove calories from their diet.
Yep.
There's, you're kind of doing this like sneaky backdoor, like stepping into the idea of food volume or volume eating, which is a very popular topic. And we touched on this recently in the podcast, but hey, you're supposed to avoid carbs. Now, most people think of carbs as breads, pastas, cakes, cookies, sugar,
Chips,
soda, chips. So if I'm going to avoid carbs, I'll take that out. Mm-hmm. What people don't think carbs are broccoli, carrots, beans, you know, other fruit, other types of plant sources and vegetables. And the reality is that those are all carbs too.
Yep.
So they cut out carbs. They cut out the high calorie carbs. They're still eating the vegetables and the fruits, the low calorie, high volume carbs. And by cutting out carbs and going low carb, they've essentially just removed all of the high calorie foods from their diet. This is a perfect way and a very normal approach, or, you know, we coach this often. That's how people can make food swaps and keep their, you know, amount of food on their plate high, but reduce calories. So there's this kind of confounding thing where it's like, oh, if I cut carbs out, I lose weight. Yes, you do, but not because you cut carbs out, because you cut out high calorie dense foods. If you had kept some of those in, but just been mindful of how many calories you were eating, you could have still lost weight. And guess what? You didn't cut out carbs because you're still eating fruit and vegetables and other things that contain carbohydrates. Yeah.
We're getting into types of carbs here a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one thing that also comes up as a point of confusion for some people is, are starchy carbs good or bad? Or what's the difference between a starchy carb and another kind of carb?
Right. You know, when we look at how carbohydrates actually occur in like the whole food form or natural form, you know, I hate to use the word natural because nowadays
Who knows what that means?
Who knows what that means, right?
Yeah.
But if you just think about plants, like that's where we're seeing most of the carbohydrates in the world. It's like in the plant kingdom. There's some in the animal, kingdom. It's some shellfish have carbs in them, and there's dairy and
The dairy kingdom.
the dairy kingdom, the milk of the animals. But generally, those carbs come in a few different forms. It's in this what people refer to as the food matrix. So there's sugar, which is carbohydrate, sugar, same thing. Sugar inside of a matrix of like fiber and like plant structure. Think about a broccoli stalk or a potato or even a grain of rice. These are plants that have carbohydrates and sugars in them in different configurations and bonds, and some have more fiber and some have more, woodsy material around them, and others just, like a banana. If you like peel back the layers of, the peel of a banana, it's just you can kind of think like, oh, this is just more of like a pure, form of carbohydrate without a ton of structure to it versus like, you're eating a big old head of broccoli or cauliflower, which is like, oh, this is this web of fiber and crunchiness and things like that. Okay. Now, when you're seeing carbohydrates show up in processed food, there's, it shows up in a lot of different ways. You're taking the carbohydrates that you can pull out of a variety of different plants. You're processing them in a way to create a better taste, to create a better texture, to create a better mouthfeel, maybe to improve shelf life of that food, a variety of different reasons why people would process something. And in the process of processing the carbohydrates, you change how that just interacts with your body. And most of the time, there's an introduction of a lot of other ingredients to make something that's really delicious for people to eat. So it is in that process of taking carbs, mixing them with fats, mixing them with proteins, creating baked goods, creating different types of refined carbohydrates that you get these types of sugars and carb sources that are really delicious, packed full of calories, and digest very quickly without oftentimes a feeling of fullness. When you eat carbohydrates in their more natural form, with the fiber, with the plant, matrix around it, with all of that, those fill you up more. They generally don't pack nearly the same amount of calories. And it's more of like, that's the preferential source. You should try and eat as much of your carbs from that side of the carbohydrate world than from the other side of the carbohydrate world, if you want to have good energy, balance, and body weight maintenance. So you think that was sufficient to break down kind of like the quality of carbohydrate discussion?
Yeah. I think there's someone out there that's like, okay, so is there a good carb and a bad carb? Or
Sure, yeah. Yeah, so then we get into how we define good and bad.
Right.
Okay, so context so matters here. I had a consult yesterday with a client who is generally a very sparse eater. Has never been a big eater.
Yeah.
Very thin, fairly lean. So not like skinny fat, but like just kind of lean and small, and wants to put on muscle. And he and I are having a conversation about how do we, he's like, everything's going good with my training, getting protein and fat in. I just don't know how to get more carbs in. It's like, it feels like a chore to get more carbs in. Now, most people listening are not going to resonate with that. They're like, dude, eat a cookie, bro. Like that's, but let me break this down more. It's like, he wants to add carbs, not a bunch of fat and not a bunch of other, he wants to just get pure carbs. So it's like, he's got to eat more of those single whole food ingredients, and he's just not used to it. It's not his, like his go-to. So I'm talking to him about strategies of how to get more carbs. And I'm giving him kind of some like, quote unquote lower quality ideas because they're easier to get calories and actual sugars from. I'm talking to him about like, well, rather than eat 5 oranges, which is going to fill him up. I'm like, let's just have a 12-ounce glass of orange juice at breakfast and lunch.
Yep.
Boom. He just got 80 calories. I mean, 80 grams of carbohydrates, just like that. Because he's trying to add about 80 to 100 a day.
Yeah.
So I'm like, well, that takes care of that. Would I talk about that to somebody who's in a fat loss stage, who's trying to lose weight? No. Mm-hmm. So in his context, that's a good carb for him.
Yeah.
It's a higher, it fits his needs. But generally, because most people are struggling with body weight gain, they want to lose fat, they have too much weight that they've gained, then in those instances, we generally kind of categorize quality as more of the whole foods or the whole food single ingredient carbohydrates like vegetables and fruit that you're eating, not juices, but like actual fruit that you're eating. Lots of veggies, some starches. And so that is what would be deemed a good carb for somebody, because you can eat it and you have a much greater margin of error of like, I can eat a decent amount of this, not go way over my calorie budget. It's going to give me good amounts of nutrients and I'm going to feel full eating it.
Yeah. And I might not have to track every single gram of it. And
beautiful. Yeah, exactly. Whereas if I told my client yesterday, like, all carbs are equal, let's just, you got to get 100 more grams of carbs. Let's just eat a bunch more broccoli. He's going to be like, that really sounds terrible.
Not
like
sustainable.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
But I actually was like, well, you can have some orange juice and you can take 2 tablespoons of dextrose, which is like table sugar, and you can pour it on your rice that you're having. He's like, oh, I'm like, that's how they make sushi rice. It's really tasty. He's like, oh, that's perfect. Then he doesn't have to eat more. He just gets more of the carbs from the same volume of food he's eating.
Yeah.
Whereas somebody on the other side, it's like, well, quote unquote bad carb is one that's packed with more stuff than you really want to be taking in. So yeah, you could have a muffin and get 60 grams of carbs from that muffin, but you're also going to get 20 grams of fat and a few grams of protein and generally a lot of calories. Whereas if you want to get 60 grams of carbs and feel really full, you could have, a big apple, and 3 whole bell peppers that are chopped up, or 2 big carrots, or something else. Like, and I'm not saying that a muffin and carrots and apples are like equally as satisfying, but for about a third of the calories and the carbohydrates that are going to help you perform and keep your energy up, the vegetable fruit option for that person would be good. Now, the perfect scenario is, okay, let's recognize that the muffin's not bad. It just has more of the things that you're trying to avoid in your quest for reducing calories and being able to like meet your goals. So you can have the muffin, or you can have half of the muffin or a third of a muffin, and then you can have an apple and a carrot, and that combination keeps you within your budget of calories and also allows you to kind of enjoy something that you like, but not go overboard on it.
Yeah.
And not to keep like jump into tangents, but this is one of the reasons why in the past I have been such a proponent of like a concept called G-flux, which is like to lose weight, the goal should be to like move more so that you can eat more.
Yeah.
Because somebody who's like losing body fat and on like a cut, who's on like 1,200 calories a day, they have very little wiggle room in their diet to explore foods that keep them, feeling excited and like they look forward to. They're down to just eating like cabbage and lettuce and, a celery stick and, a couple berries and then some protein and
some lean chicken breast.
Yeah. Like they're really starting to kind of pull out all the fun from food because they're on such they burn so low. Low. They burn low. So I'm like, well, if you can burn really hot, then guess what? Like on a day where you want to indulge, you can still hit your goals and have a bowl of cereal. And that's like a great place to be if you're trying to navigate this world of like carb confusion where it's like all carbs can fit. It's just a matter of like, what's your budget? My budget is 1,200 calories or my budget is 4,000 calories. Like, okay, I want to be in that camp, but realistically, I can't work out 10 hours a day. So what's the best I can do? I can lift weights. I can get more steps in. I can stand at my desk. I can do some of these things. So I have a bigger budget of calories where I can say, yeah, I don't have to like cut out every quote unquote bad carb that there is. I can leave room for a little cookie, 2 or 3 Thin Mints with dinner, whatever.
Yeah.
In addition to eating some oats and eating some veggies and broccoli and, spinach and fruit and, all of the more plant matrix carbs that are better on the, weight loss journey.
Yeah. When I look at the type of nutrition education that's just out there culturally, on news articles that are coming up on my feed or on social media or people who are talking about it, I always feel like there's such a weighted approach towards these more absolutes around nutrition, like carbs are bad, okay? And their purpose is to, like you said, help people overall reduce calories. Mm-hmm. But I feel like there's a real lack of education around how to balance all the factors. And we're not talking about a lot of factors. There's just a handful.
Yes.
But that's the biggest thing for me that really tracking food closely for a time has really helped with, because you start to understand that, yeah, if I'm going to have the muffin, that's totally fine, but it's going to have to come out somewhere else in my overall calorie, carbohydrate, fat budget for the day.
Totally.
So I may end up eating something for dinner that just doesn't feel that satiating.
Yes.
Or I may end up, eating something that really appeals to me in the moment. And then I get to my training and I'm like, well, I don't really feel fueled for the day because I haven't really supplied myself with the nutrients that are going to do me some good in the gym and give me energy. Mm-hmm. So it does take practice, and it's kind of hard to convey that to people. But when I look at having practiced it for a while, that mentality versus like before I ever really practiced it for myself, it's just been a very different change in my understanding of how the different factors balance each other out. Mm-hmm. And what an ideal plate for me looks like, because I know for myself that if I go low carb, that means I'm going to have to put in higher fat somewhere else. Mm-hmm. And that just doesn't feel the best for me personally.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's there's a lot of people educating on nutrition that have the best intention to help people, lower their caloric intake and have like success in their weight loss journey. And carbs are an easy thing to just point at and pull out. But I think the harder work as a coach or as an educator, but the more meaningful and helpful work for the customer or the client is to take the time to show them, like, this is how this thing really works. Like, you have a budget of calories. You need a certain amount of protein for your health, longevity, and your goals. And beyond that, it doesn't really matter what you do with carbs and fat. Yes, it doesn't matter. And it just matters in the context of who you are and what helps you feel the best and adhere to your budget. Mm-hmm. So, if you want to be a high carb person, you can. You just have to learn what that means for you. If you want to be a low carb person, you like higher fat stuff, you can do that. The problem one of the challenges I have, and I always push back on this, is that a lot of people say, like, oh, I just feel better when I'm low carb. And I just always wonder if that is like true, or if that is just their like subconscious fear of carbs, where they're like, because that was me for a number of years. Like, I'm better with low carb. And I was like, was I better with low carb? No, I actually wasn't. I wasn't actually functioning and performing at my best. I was just kind of low key fearful of eating a bunch of carbs when I wasn't training like a professional athlete. And I've been working on that for the last couple of years to like rewrite that narrative in my head and just like actively work against it, because it's deep seated for a lot of people.
It is.
And so that's kind of the hard work that we're doing right now. And it's like, I hear it, I can empathize with, like, they're like, yeah, I can't, like, somebody would say like, God, you're so lucky you get to eat all those carbs. I'm like, yeah, I hate that you're in that spot where you feel like you can't. Or like when we look at our macro calculator sort of data.
Yeah. Everyone's like low carb, low carb.
Yeah. It's like you have an option to choose whether you want to be moderate, high, or low carb. And I don't know what the percentage is, but it's the majority of people choose low carb.
Yeah. And we even say like we recommend moderate.
Yeah,
as
we
a good place
recommend
to
moderate.
start.
Yeah. And it's funny because it's like even the moderate is, just to not to like to appeal to most people, it's on the lower side of things, right?
Yeah.
It's like because when you're dealing with an athletic population, you want them having a bit more carbohydrates. And it's funny even like seeing this in the carnivore community of like, so these are some individuals who are very, they're ketogenic. They're eating just meat and fat. And a lot of them have kind of shifted to, they like, we're going to change our name to animal-based, because now animal-based diet includes dairy, fruit, and honey, which is like, okay, now we have like acceptable carb sources that we can have with which is great. It's like, okay, now you're getting a more balanced macronutrient profile. You got people who are wanting to be very athletic and very, Dr. Paul Saladino is very outspoken. It's like, carnivore stopped working for me. I'm trying to surf 2 hours a day. I want to be active. I want to be, play sports. Like I needed some carbs.
Yeah.
And when I introduced carbs, it was way better.
Yeah.
And then he's like, I actually just listened to a podcast with him yesterday where he was like, I went as far as to experiment with bringing rice and potatoes back into my diet. And he was like, he's on the very end, like far end of like autoimmune, like prone, like, or has autoimmune, disease essentially. And so he is very sensitive to like, okay, this doesn't make me feel good. This does. That's why he's been kind of outspoken against certain plant foods. Like if it makes you feel bad, stop eating it. So he introduced those things as a way to be like, hey, carbs are not the enemy. Like actually when I eat carbs, I feel really good and I perform really well. Maybe rice would make me even better. And apparently he tried it and it just didn't feel good for him. But it's like he's now more open, like this community of people is more open to being like, hey, if this makes you freaking function better, like great. And rice and potatoes are totally in that category of like, this is a food where there's carbohydrates inside of a matrix of like a plant, and you're eating it and it's got some fiber. Not a lot, compared to like broccoli or carrot, but it's got some. And it's not like you're, introducing like, okay, I'm going to have like donuts every day.
Yeah.
Try that out. Right.
Yeah.
And not to say that donuts are going to be bad, but it's like, if you try and have donuts every day, you're going to run into this challenge of like, you just introduced a lot of calories, fat, and carbs all at once, as opposed to just introducing, have a sweet potato every night for dinner, have a white potato for lunch, have 1 cup of white rice. And it's like, as I'm saying that, I'm remembering back to 2013, I started getting personal coaching, as I was like ramping up my training to be a CrossFit Games individual competitor. I was very low carb back then.
Yeah.
I thought having like a couple like chopped up, like sliced potato like rings on my plate was like a lot of carbs. Like, it was like a third of a sweet potato. I was like, whoa, that's a lot. And I remember my coach being like, yeah, so I need you to like get like at least 1 cup of white rice and just plonk it on every plate that you eat. I'm like, no, I'm gonna get fat. Like seriously, just freaking out. And eventually, just like finishing up that, well, and even now it's like 500 grams of carbs a day, like that's workable inside my budget. And I'm not like, it's not like I touched these carbs and I'm suddenly just, overweight, right? It's like, no, I'm staying within my calorie budget, getting my protein in. I'm training as much as I train and move as much as I move. And this is what my body needs.
What advice would you give someone who is fearful of carbs?
we're going to get into this in an upcoming episode, but you have, there's the path to getting to really have full control and freedom of what you get to eat is through understanding and controlling some of these variables and inputs, like what am I actually eating? Somebody who's afraid of carbs, don't go and just be like, okay, well, Marcus said carbs are okay, so I'm just going to have that muffin. I'm going to get the croissant each morning and, just sort of like randomly add things in. And it's like, okay, well, I want to have more carbs. So start with a swap, some type of swap where it's like, okay, instead of having like the really fatty cut of meat and like a couple leaves of spinach, why don't you switch that up, get a leaner cut of meat and then have a potato, where you didn't like measure it. You didn't go down to the exact gram, but you realize like if you're going to introduce more carbs, something else has to give a little bit.
Yeah.
You got to maybe cut back on something else, and you might find that really feels good. It's like if you want to have your ribeye covered in butter and then you're managing to have that because you're on the side only having a couple little vegetables. And now you're like, well, I want to eat a potato too. So I'm going to add the potato on top of that, ribeye with butter. Well, you didn't swap something out. You just added 250 calories to your day. But if you left the butter off, or you got a strip steak or a top sirloin, something that's leaner, and you had a sweet potato on the side, okay, now the calories are the same.
Yep.
You're getting to eat carbs, which may in turn make you feel a little bit different because now your muscles are getting, more full of glycogen more quickly, and you get to use that energy when you train. And you start to feel like, wow, I feel better doing this. I like this. My training's great. I get to enjoy a food group that I've kind of written off. I didn't think I could ever have again. And so that's kind of the first place to start, is like make a swap with something.
Yeah. Great.
Sweet. All right, y'all. Well, any more carb confusion? We love to answer this question, so keep it coming. And there's no question that is out of bounds.
Absolutely.
Bring it.
No,
all right.
Bring it.
See you next time.
See ya.